Hello everyone and welcome to my tutorial on the GameMaker basics. This is the video you watch if you've never used GameMaker before and you would like to. So I'm going to try to keep this quick because my tutorials usually end up going really long, but I have a feeling even though I said that, it probably still will. So let's get started. First thing in GameMaker is rooms. This is the world that your game lives in. It can be full of objects and it can have backgrounds and stuff, but pretty much this is where everything in the game dwells. And let's get to those dwelling things. Now first, we're going to talk about sprites. That's not true. We're going to talk about objects first. I planned out this whole tutorial. I never do this, but this time I did because I wanted to get it right. Alright, this is GameMaker Simple Mode. It's going to be missing a little bit of stuff here that normally you'd see, so yours might look a little bit different, but this is just the basic mode for you basic viewers. Alright, first thing I always do is I name my object. So objects can be pretty much anything. They're the things that live in the rooms, pretty much. They can be anything from a wall to a character that you're playing, or it could be an enemy, or it could be the bullet that you're shooting at the enemy. It can be anything. Sometimes I use objects for scenery in the background and they do absolutely nothing except for sit there. So first thing I always do is I name my object. This is going to be my guy. Very good. Now we're going to get to the sprites. This is the good stuff. Sprites are the things that represent the objects. For example, I'm going to load this sprite. This is going to be the sprite that represents this object. So I can go to the object and I can choose what the sprite is for that object. Very cool. Now there are also other things like backgrounds. Can be mountains, which is the one that I'm going to show you for this tutorial today. There's also sounds. I was going to try to keep this clean. Anyways, this is going to be our sound hit, whatever. There are backgrounds, there's sounds, there's sprites, and there's objects, and there's rooms. These are all called resources. Ta-da! Click the resources tab and you've got all those different resources that pop down here. Let's get to our room. In here we can put our objects and we can put our backgrounds in here too. But if you run the game, you'll see that even though you've got your character, he's not doing anything. Not a whole lot of fun. So let's get right to the good stuff. For objects, there are two things. There are events and there are actions. Event is something that, like, say, when the object is created, you can have a creation event. And then there are actions, and actions are pretty much what happens when the event occurs. So for the creation event, when the object is created, it will perform an action, and here's a whole list of actions that you can choose from. When the object is created, we can take that and drag it in here, and we'll say let's move up at the speed of 1. So now, if you press this button and run the game, or press F5, then now when the object was created, it started moving upwards. There are also other events like keyboard events. Say if I press up, we'll take that and we'll put it in here. Delete that. So now if I would press up, then our object would start moving upwards. So now nothing's going to happen and wabamo, pressed up goes the rocket. There are also other events like collision events. Say if I had another object, I could make a collision event, and then when those two objects touch, then it'll call this event and it can do whatever you want it to. That's all for events. Now I'm going to start showing you a few actions. There's cool actions like moving. There's this moving, which you can choose your direction, and then when you press the up key to activate the event and cause the action, then it moves to the right. Now, there are also other kinds of moving, like say move free, where you give a direction. Now, I didn't plan this part of the tutorial, but I think it'll be a good thing to learn. Here is pretty much how the world goes. Here is your room. It's a perfect rectangle, and here is a position 0, 0. As you keep going this way, your room will the X value will get bigger in the room. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then here, 0. As you go down, it also gets bigger. So this is a little bit different than the graphs that you learned in grade 3, because normally down is negative, but in GameMaker, down is positive. Nice thing to know. Also, for directions, here, say, is a cross, and here is a circle. Perfect circle. This is the origin of it. Man, this is great. Anyways, what happens is, this is the direction 0. 0 is completely to the right. 90 is up here. This is 180. And this is 270. And this is also 360. Very cool. So the directions start here, going to the right, and go counterclockwise. Whew, that's messy. Alright, let's get back to the good stuff. So, if I press up and set the direction to 90 and set the speed to something, 1, then when we run the game, then when I press up, he goes up, because 90 is up. Very cool. Let's see, there's also a kind of move called the jump to position. What'll happen here is you can set the position on the map anywhere, say 64, 64, and then when you press this key, then he'll jump there, wherever that position is, because this is 64 pixels this way and 64 pixels down. There's also a few other events, like, say for example, sprite. You can change the sprite. I'm going to load one more sprite in here. We're going to load the meteor sprite. I always name them. Rock. Haha. Take that, rock. Now, what you can do here is you can change the sprite from one thing to another. So, now when I run the game, when I press up, it changes to the rock sprite. This can be really handy. Say, for example, you can have sprites of your character running right and sprites of your character running left. And then when you press left, you can change the sprite to left. And when you press right, you can change the sprite to right. And it'll change what you're doing. You can change direction. You can do all these crazy things that all these crazy programmers are doing, except here, it's simple. Alright, there's a few other things like sounds. You can play sounds, like sound hit, which I loaded in myself, but I did not make. So now when I press up, it plays a sound. It sounds really weird, but that's okay. So you can use that. You can play background music with that if you like. There are also other things called variables. Now this is where GameMaker starts getting a little bit confusing. There are variables like X, which is predetermined. That's the position of your object on the screen. So if I set variable X to 64, then when I run the game, when I press that key, it sets the X position of that object to 64. This can be very handy in a lot of places. You can also make your own variables. Say, for example, the variable ammo, where you can set ammo to 64, and then later on, then you can add more ammo if you pick up an ammo pack or whatever. But these made-up variables don't help anything if there's nothing reacting to them. So, I'm going to show you something crazy called if statements. Alright, so here's how if statements work. All these blue shape thingies are if statements. If it's blue, it's for controlling actions and it doesn't actually perform any actions. Alright, we're going to make up a variable. I'm going to show you how this works. We're going to set the variable blob to 5. And then we're going to check if the variable blob is 5. And if it is, then after this check statement, then you perform your action, which here we're going to change the sprite to rock. Alright, let's see if this works. Are you ready for the key press up? Oh! So what happened was we made a variable and then we checked if the variable was 5. But if we set this to 4, it won't change. I could show you, but I think you get the idea. So what happens here is you can also set add event, create, control set variable blob to 0, and then there's this other crazy thing called relative. Now what this does is if I say 1, then if I set it relative to 1, then if the variable was 0, then it adds 1 on. Or if I set it 2, then it adds 2 to whatever the variable was before. So first it'll be 0, and then when I perform this, it'll be 2, and then next time I perform this, it will be 4, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to say relative to 1, and we're just going to change this to key press up. What happens here is the keyboard events, this just checks every, 30 times a second, it checks whether this key is being pressed, and if it is, then it performs the action. There's also key presses, and this only happens right when you press the key, and there's key releases, and this only happens right when you let go of the key. But this happens all the time in between. So we're going to say key press up, set blob to 1. If blob is equal to 5, we're going to change the sprite into the rock. So what happens here is at the beginning, the variable is 0. Now I press up, now it's 1, 2, 3, and we keep adding until, wabamo, the variable is 5, and it can change the sprite into the rock. That might be a bit confusing, but there's also another thing. Sometimes, some of you might be thinking, well, what if I wanted to do two things? What if I also want to play a sound effect, sound hit? Well, it's not that simple as just putting it after this, because now, if we run it, it'll just play that sound every time, but we don't want it to. See, watch. Oh, it played the sound. I don't know if you can hear that or not. We don't want it to play the sound every time, only when blob is equal to 5. So what we do is we put in brackets. By the way, when I'm just popping things in here, what I'm doing is right-clicking, and then it just shoves whatever I'm right-clicking on to the back of the lineup of all the action list thing. So what happens here is, by my if statement, whatever one single block is after that, that action is performed if the statement is true. But if I put in brackets in, then it performs the one block, which is the entire bracket. So now it'll play through this whole thing, and then it'll continue on doing actions as normal. So now when I run it, then only when blob is equal to 5 will the sound hit play. This can be really handy. You know what, first I'm going to show you how this works, because it's just super. Are you ready? Oh, nothing's happening. Oh, wait for it. Oh, there it went. This is exciting. Okay, there's also another thing called an else statement. What happens here is if blob is 5, it does this. Else, it'll do that. So, pretty much, all the times that blob is equal to 5, it'll change this. But if blob isn't equal to 5, then it'll do this. So it'll either do this, or it'll do this. The else statement pretty much says if the last action that was checked on was not performed, then we'll perform the next one instead. So, we'll run this, and what should happen is every time I press up, it'll play the sound unless the blob is equal to 5, in which case it won't, because it'll change to the rock, and then the else statement won't allow you to play the sound. So check it out. And now blob is just getting higher and higher, and it's never 5 again. So that's a little bit of the basics of kind of variables, ifs, and else statements. You can also do other checks, like checking if there's objects by you, or checking if there's whatever. You can pretty much check whatever you want, but I'm just going to delete everything in here, and I'm going to show you alarms. This is a crazy thing that one day I figured out and thought, man, that's handy. So what I'm going to do is, on the creation event, when the object is created, I'm going to set an alarm, and this is alarm 0. Now what happens is the game thinks 30 times a second, which is the default room speed. You can change this under the settings, but usually 30 is prime, and I usually leave it at that. So we're going to set alarm 0, say I want it to be 5 seconds, then I would have to do 30 times 5, which is 150, I think. So what we're going to do is we're going to say OK, and just remember this is for alarm 0, and now what this does is it sets a timer and that counts down 1 every single step, and a step happens 30 times per second. So what happens is we can add an event which is an alarm. And now when this alarm is set, then after 150 steps, then it performs this event, which can do something else, like move the object. And you can change speed to whatever you want. Speed is pixels per second. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this, and 5 seconds after the game starts, our object will start moving and I won't touch anything. I hope it works. Ta-da! Winner! Okay, that's pretty much the basics of alarms, and the reason they have a bunch of alarms is in case you want to set a bunch of alarms. Now, there's another thing in the game, and what happens is our object has a sprite, but sometimes you want objects to draw things. And what happens is you can have an event called the draw event, which happens every frame or every step 30 times a second. It'll do this, and it can draw things for you. So you could draw your sprite guy, relative, and relative pretty much says whatever this is, which is x, we'll add whatever variable we want to it, which is 0, and y is 0. So this will pretty much, the position here that it's setting is going to be on the character. It might seem a bit confusing, but in time it'll come together and it'll make sense. Sub-image right now we can ignore and not worry about. So what happens is now when you run the game, pretty much it'll just draw the sprite on the guy. But you can also say draw the rock. So what happens here is even though the sprite is this rocket, it'll draw the rock over top. Now what happens is you can do more than one draw in the draw event. So you can draw a sprite relative to 64, relative, and what'll happen is it'll draw the rock, and it'll also draw another rock to the side of it. So you can have one object drawing more than one thing. You can also draw other things like rectangles. So x1 is, let's open up Paint again because it was so much fun last time. Okay, here's our room, perfect rectangle. x1 is the first position of the rectangle. y1 is the first y position of the rectangle, so say that's this point. And then x2 and y2 is another position pair, so that could be, say, here, where x is a little bit bigger than x1, and y is a little bit bigger, and y2 is a little bit bigger than y1. So we're going to put that there, and then it'll draw a rectangle using those 2 points. So x1 we're going to say is 5, y1 is going to say be 8, x2 is going to be that number, and y2 is going to be that number. So now when we draw this rectangle, it draws there. It's black because the default drawing color is black, but our rocket's not there. What happens is if you draw something, if your object uses the draw event, it won't draw itself anymore by default. So you can go ahead and draw the sprite manually. Just click relative, and then as long as the sprite is the same as the sprite of the guy, it should work. Another thing you can do is under settings here, there's this color palette thing, and you can change the color. And we're going to choose blue here. And what that'll do is make it so when you draw the rectangle, it's a different color. How cool. Now this could be used for whatever, health bar, but there's also other built-in health bar features. So what happens is the draw event is the only place you can draw stuff. You can't go to the step event and say draw a sprite in there. So that should pretty much be the basics. First, though, I'm going to show you a little bit about you can put in your objects. You can put more than one of the same object. I'm just going to show you a little bit more how rooms work. You can put a bunch of objects in here, show your grid, don't show your grid. You can change the grid size. Usually 32 is fairly default. Toss your objects in here. You can go to settings, change the size of stuff. So the size of the room, we can make this smaller like that. Or we can go to backgrounds and say toss this in here. And you're probably thinking, man, that looks dumb with all the mountains. So what you can do is stretch it out, which right now looks pretty bad, but if you go in here and do some weird things, then eventually stuff can start to work again. But see here, it smooths it out a little bit. But what I did there is I just went to this thing here and clicked interpolate colors between pixels, which pretty much blurs stuff together a little bit when it's scaled funny, or when things are in between pixels. Anyways, that's pretty much how rooms work. You can name your rooms. There are also, if you want to have more than one room for different levels, there are events like going to the next room. That can be pretty useful. Now that's pretty much the basics of GameMaker. You should be able to make you should be able to start messing around, kind of have a basic concept of what's going on. This is a very simplified version of GameMaker. If you click Advanced Mode, it gives you a bunch of extra resources like paths, which are fun. There's fonts, there's timelines, which are really cool once you figure them out, but save that for a little bit later. There are scripts, which is pretty much code, which that's like getting really complicated. And there's a bunch of cool extra stuff, and the one tip I want to give you today, if you didn't learn anything from the tutorial, F1. Remember that. F1 is your best friend, other than me. So what's going to happen is you click F1 and you think, man, how do I make an object move? And then, whammo, here's all of the different things that say move. So say you click actions, and you can scroll down. Oh, move actions. That's very interesting. Move fixed. And then it's got all this information about what all the different actions do. How awesome is this? Like wrap screen, what does that do? Read this quick. Oh, when your object goes to one side of the room and then you perform this event, it flips him over around and makes him look like he's just wrapping around. Alright, anyways, F1, best friend. Pretty much all this stuff here, this whole getting started thing, that I've explained most of that to you. The global user interface, I hope I've explained most of that to you. Defining sprites, sound, music, defining objects, events. Alright, some of these events stuff, that would be good to read. Just, you don't have to, like you could probably get started and just mess around and try figuring it out yourself. But events would be good to read. this action stuff here. This explains what all the different actions do. This is very F1. Don't forget that. F1 is your friend. All these different all these different action sets. This is so good. Here's some more variables. H speed, what's that? Oh, it's the horizontal speed in pixels per step. This stuff is so good. So whatever you do, if you're confused, press F1 and this will help you out so much. I pretty much taught myself GameMaker using this GameMaker help thing. So, and I think I'm pretty good so far, but I may seem like a pretty bad teacher because I just flew through that. But I hope you learned a bunch today, and I hope you can go out and start messing around with GameMaker, trying to figure out stuff for yourself. And that comes to the end of my tutorial. So, have a nice day, and see you next time.